Hello and welcome to the Women in Local Government Future Leaders webinar. My name is Catherine Carter. I'm Chief Executive Officer with Local Government Professionals Australia. A very warm welcome to everyone who's dialed in from across the country to today's webinar during a special week. Today, of course, is NAIDOC Week, and we're webcasting from Canberra on Ngunnawal country. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land and pay my respects to the Ngunnawal people and their continuing culture and the contribution they make to the life of this city, Canberra, and to the capital region. I also acknowledge and welcome Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be participating in today's webinar from across the country. Welcome, everyone. For first-timers, the purpose of this webinar series is to share practical work skills tailored to women. We want to encourage emerging leaders and increase the number of women in the executive level of local government. But this isn't a club. These webinars are available to everyone, not only women. Please join in, participate. This webinar, particularly today, will provide many opportunities for you to actively participate in the conversation. So join in, participate, and support your female colleagues. Today we're exploring some big questions and also following a personal leadership journey through the eyes of a senior woman in our sector. Fiona Cullen, Program Facilitator of Local Managers Australia in Queensland, is our guest speaker today. She'll be talking about managing stress, priorities and workplace expectations. Welcome, Fiona.
Thanks for having me, Catherine.
It's really great to see you today. Over the course of today's webinar, which will go for 50 minutes for all of you that have dialed in, we'll be hearing about Fiona's leadership journey, but also tips and tricks that she's learned on the way about managing workplace priorities, stress and so on. Fiona is an incredible speaker and we're really privileged to be able to welcome Fiona today. Fiona represented Australia in 2 sports as an elite athlete, in both athletics and in bobsled. But how does an athlete become a local government trainer? What are the lessons she learnt in sport that translate to working life? We will find out soon. But we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers, also after speaking with Fiona. But first, let's go get to know our guest. Fiona Cullen, welcome, and let's hear your story.
Thanks so much for having me, everyone, and welcome. I too wish to add my acknowledgement of country. So I'm fortunate to live in Brisbane. So our offices here are in Meanjin, Brisbane, on Turrbal and Yagara country. And I also live down on the bay in Wynnum, Manly, and that is Quandamooka country down there. So I acknowledge where I live and work and play and learn and work. I also acknowledge and pay respects to any Torres Strait Islander and Aboriginal people on the call today, and I acknowledge your connection to country as kin. I recently was given a book called Living on Stolen Land by Amberlynn Kayawalamalam. And can I put my first slide up? Is that okay? Just want to let you guys have a look at that. I highly recommend having a read of this book. It's a small, tiny, thin book. It's a manifesto, essentially, but it really spoke to me, and it really helped me to understand how a modern Australian can seek to, I guess, acknowledge that our nation was built on and we all still benefit from the dispossession of the Indigenous lands, rights, culture, language, story and dreaming. So, given that it is NAIDOC Week, and if you're still not sure about your reconciliation journey personally and how you, as a modern Australian, want to contribute to the reconciliation process, highly recommend getting this book, having a read of it and sharing it with every Australian and visitor to this nation of ours. Okay, so in terms of, I guess, an intro to who I am, as Catherine mentioned, two sports. So I've represented Australia 5 times. So track and field was my sport initially, and once I'd finished jumping over hurdles, I also had the opportunity to go to the World Championships of bobsleigh. So yes, it is exactly like Cool Runnings. Yes, sprinters make the best bobsledders. So my life essentially was imitating art. And it's interesting as well. You'd wonder, what is the connection between someone who did elite sport and how did I come to be in local government? And the answer is, as an elite athlete, I got really interested in how to manage your mindset in order to produce peak performance on purpose, intentionally, under extreme circumstances, in order to obviously rise to the challenges set before us. The Melbourne Commonwealth Games photo there, is quite a significant milestone in my life. And likewise, going down an ice chute at 120 k's an hour, pulling 4Gs around a 360 is, there's a lot that goes on in your mind during those times. And yes, I intentionally put myself in those situations. But what I learned from that around who I am, what I'm made of, what I'm capable of, and how to manage my state in order to produce the best possible performance, strangely but true, completely transferable to the context of business. In fact, probably, what I would suggest is a fundamental skill of all people in work, but particularly people that are in leadership roles or managing other people and managing the performance and output of other people. So this particular presentation today, I guess the combination of what I learned through sport and then how I went through marketing and communications. For as long as I've been in my working world as a marketer, as a communications professional, I've been equally interested in how do I influence other human beings to make certain behaviors, to choose to sell, to buy certain things, or whatever message I was selling. So completely transferable skills. And now in my leadership facilitation training role, I'm essentially teaching human beings how to manage themselves, how to produce peak performance, and then how to lead and build other people in teams to essentially emulate peak performance on purpose as well. This is probably the key thing in terms of a takeaway from today is strategies to do things on purpose. And when we get off track, or when we get overwhelmed, or we get stressed, and we're not in peak performance state, how do we get ourselves out of the overwhelm and back into that performance state? So we're going to talk about that today. The other thing that I wanted to point out as well, and I guess what qualifies me to have this conversation, since February this year, I have worked with 115 people across 18 councils in Queensland. I've delivered 22 face-to-face workshops and delivered 87 one-on-one coaching sessions, 60 of which were 360-degree feedback sessions. So much of this conversation that we're having today has come out of the conversations I've had with those people since February, in the specific context of local government and in the specific context of the crazy 6 months that we've just lived through, which I think most of you hopefully will agree, is even more in some respects crazy than the 2 years previous that we did live through the pandemic. So that's kind of where this has come from and what I've observed over the last 4 or 5 months working in the sector. So these are the learning outcomes today. We're going to look at how do we reduce our primary causes of stress and overwhelm? How do we adjust our prioritization strategies so we can effectively gain agreement around what are the priorities? Because guess what? They shift moment by moment, don't they? And also, how can we choose to proactively take an empowered approach to managing expectations? Because that's one of the hardest parts, I think, that we've all experienced in the last little bit, that managing of expectations, and how do we proactively take control of that. Alrighty, so For those that are on the call that have worked with me before, you'll know that I love practical interactions. So there'll be 3 live polls. So in your platform there, you should have a link to the Slido poll. For those that have got the QR code, scan that, or you can open a browser, put the slido.com and then add the number in. So our first poll talks about, yeah, beautiful. The first poll talks about, when someone asks to take something new on, how do you manage your workload? What's your level of comfort saying no and pushing back? So I'm wanting to get a sense of where people are at with regards to this one. And the beauty of Slido, as you can see, it's a live poll, it's a live result. So the numbers will keep shifting around here as people engage in the poll. Interesting, we haven't had anyone choose the bottom one yet. Okay, so I feel like we've pretty much settled here. So not surprising that the vast majority are like, depends on the request, right? Absolutely. So I usually ask questions to clarify the priority. So I'm delighted that that's the vast majority. And for those that were brave enough to respond to the other questions, thank you for that. What I want to talk to on those fronts is the connection between what I call limiting beliefs. So where we have an internal representation, and it's interesting that the second highest one is, if I say no, I feel guilty, or I'm afraid of letting people down. So that's a decent percentage of the number of people on the call today. And, not unlike, even the 4% that say, if it comes from my superior, I'm not in a position to say no. And I want to point to the fact that that I feel has a direct connection to local government mindset in particular. So in the world of local government, there are lots of us that still feel like we cannot challenge chain of command and we cannot challenge authority, and it's not an option to push back to our superiors. So I'm wanting to ideally challenge your thinking around that, if that's something that's in play for you. I'm very uncomfortable saying no because I don't feel like that's an option, and then, totally comfortable no is a complete sentence. So keen to hear from our 2% who have got this handled. And if you have specific, ideas or strategies or an insight into your mindset and your thinking behind that, keen for you to share that as well. So not surprising, again, coming back to it, depends on the request. I usually ask for questions to clarify priorities. So my question to the vast majority of people today, when you're asking the questions and you clarify the priority, and it still is not possible in your current capacity to deliver, do you still feel comfortable saying no? So that's a question to ask yourself, and to maybe note down, if I clarify it's a priority, my manager says it's a priority, but I don't necessarily agree that it's a priority, what happens then? Do you still push back? Do you still have the clarifying conversation? So that's something to think about, and we'll also address that in the next section of the poll. So first things first, around how do we, in terms of the primary cause of stress and overwhelm, the first thing I want to present for you as a concept or an idea is, are you the primary cause? And by this, I mean your mindset, your approach, your, limiting beliefs. Are there things underneath in your own psyche that are driving stress responses from you? And it's interesting, whenever I present, the universe hands me the exact lesson that I need to learn. I had a brilliant example yesterday of getting myself into an extreme case of stress and overwhelm. And, thankfully, I had a chance to talk it through with a trusted colleague and coach, and she helped, talk me down off the ledge and restore some sanity to my brain to rationalize what I actually, needed to say and reduce the stress response. So first gem or first concept is limiting beliefs. So do you currently have limiting beliefs underlying your stress responses? So limiting beliefs are beliefs about yourself, about the world, or about life. The thing about limiting beliefs, as the name would suggest, is they prevent us from pursuing goals and desires. They also put boundaries and limitations on what we perceive to be reasonable behavior. So this is the key. It's a perception, and it's completely made up in our own heads. It's not necessarily the truth. And because we're the ones that have created it, we can change the belief. We can reframe it. We can choose to think differently or choose a different belief that will have us be more empowered rather than limited. The thing about limiting beliefs as well is they're not good or bad. So, having a limiting belief that stealing is bad is actually, produces good actions and ethical behavior. So it's not about good or bad. It's about, are my beliefs limiting my options? And am I getting the results that I want, or am I currently producing results that I don't want? So that's the key there. And that's how you know whether there's a limiting belief at play. If you have a limiting belief that is holding you back, you'll make different choices and you'll take different actions. So in terms of examples of limiting beliefs that I have heard a lot in the last 6 months through my exposure to the sector, things like, if I push back and say no, I'll be seen as incompetent or weak. If I push back or say no, I will be letting people down, or I'll be failing at my job. Or if I push back and say no, I'll be disciplined or could lose my job. So, practical part, if you have one of these, grab a hold of it. If that's your version, or if there's a different kind of version of limiting belief that you have around this stuff, now's the chance to take a moment and have a think about when you get into a state of stress and overwhelm, or feel like you are disempowered to say no or push back, is there something that you're causing in your own mind that's producing a stress response? So an example for me yesterday was, if I take on more than I currently have, I won't be able to deliver to the level of quality I would like, and I will feel like I am setting myself up for failure. Now, is that the truth? Possibly. Is it based on past experience? Yes. Is it the whole story? And is it the bit that I stop with? No. So I had to challenge that belief and unwrap myself from it so that I could reframe it. So here's the first tip. If you've got a limiting belief at play that's causing you to feel limited and as if you have no choices or options, have a look for it, pull it out, identify it, and then reframe it. So here's an example of a reframe. So when I manage my workload appropriately, I am seen as competent and reliable, as an example. So take a moment and have a go at reframing whatever limiting belief you had from the first section. Okay. Cool. So the next poll has gone up and a lot of you have already responded, which is great. Okay, so I have a to-do list. Does that count? Beautiful. All right. So once we've figured out that we're the cause and we've reframed our limiting belief and we've got much more, rational thinking back in play, the other thing that we tend to do to ourselves that cause stress and overwhelm is not having a clear sense of exactly what our priorities are. So, to-do list. If there's only one thing you take away from today's conversation, please let it be this. A to-do list is essentially the same as a wish list. The way that our brains relate to a list is almost like, I guess you've got to understand how our brains work. Our brains work in a linear time pattern. So if you have a list of things that don't have any connection to reality, i.e. a date, a time, and by date I mean 5th of July 2022, then your brain does not relate to that item on a to-do list as being in reality or having any form of goal or time-bound agreement in place. So it will choose or not choose to engage with it. So for those that have a to-do list that has no connection to a date or time for delivery, your number one productivity uplift tip is have a look at your to-do list and grab your top 3 that need to happen in the next 24 hours and schedule them into reality, either into your Outlook diary or whatever you use to organize yourself, must come off the list and have a time and a date attached to it for delivery. Without that, your brain will not consider it a real goal in real time, and it will not take action towards completing it. It will see it as a nice to have, a wish, a someday maybe, and it will never get done, which actually, by the way, is why your to-do list never gets done. So, psychology 101 there, neuroscience 101. Depends on the day, everything changes so often I lose track. So the thing about priorities is they change moment by moment, don't they? So the question then becomes, how do you check and with who? So all of us have some form of target or performance plan for each year. And if you're not sure what yours is, make sure you either create one for yourself or you check in with your line manager about what it is. So get clarity on your priorities and your targets and output. And for us in local government, the number one performance output plan is our operational plan. Everything we do in local government is to deliver on the operational plan. So if you don't understand which part of that plan belongs to you and how your priority actions contribute to that, or the priority actions of your team, then this is a big chunk of work to be done. For those that answered some of the other ones around it's all in my head, get it out of your head and into reality. The other thing about prioritizing, particularly when we're leading people, if we're not clear, how can we delegate or ask for help or engage others in the delivery of our outputs? Also, if we're not clear on our priorities and someone asks us to redirect our time and energy towards a different task, how can we say no with integrity if we don't already know where our priority actions and investment of output are headed? Without a clear understanding of priorities, you can't say no with integrity, because it's not about no, not now, or no, not ever. It's no, not now, or it's no, these are my current priorities. Where does this fit? And coming back to the first question, if you ask the question to clarify the prioritization, you can then have a robust conversation with whoever's asking you to redirect your time, and be sure that both of you, as servants of the public, are appropriately allocating time, energy, and resources to get the best possible outcome for your community, and in the service of the public. Okay. So if you don't manage your priorities, then how can anyone manage them? So you need to know what they are so you can manage them. You need to know what they are so that you can delegate and manage the delivery across the team. And you need to be able to manage them so that you can appropriately manage up and push back where required to make sure that resources are being placed in the best possible location for the success of your output. So the other thing as well around the public sector, I highly recommend, and I can put the link to this article in the chat, have a read of this article. It really frames the local government context well around how we manage the priorities in the public sector, because there is a human cost attached to it. If we're making a decision about where to put our time and effort, we need to be able to justify that to our community and our constituents, right? So visualize your priorities, get them out of your head, get them into a system, be able to share them with other people, all of that. And then be able to, with confidence and integrity, say, okay, these are my priorities right now. Which one do you want me to shift or pause in order to reprioritize what you've just asked me to do? Sounds easy, right? It is when we have clarity about what the priorities are. It's still a hard conversation. It still requires a robust approach, but not impossible. And in fact, much more possible when you know what your priorities are. Okay, so connected back to the limiting belief, when I push back respectfully and question priorities, I'm contributing to a better quality decision-making process. An invitation to perhaps take this empowering belief on to help you with that process, as well as the tip for visualizing. And our final poll. Okay, so since the beginning of the year, it's been a crazy, crazy year. I'm not surprised that the vast majority, it's been somewhere between 25 to 50%. I've spoken across across different sectors, and they've had similar challenges. So when you don't have a full team available to deliver the work, how do you manage expectations? How do you push back? How robust is the relationship between your executive leadership team, your CEO, and your elected members around shifting priorities? A lot of councils have been through disaster management for the greater part of this first half of the year. Crazy, crazy stuff. Again, it connects through to the priorities, but it also connects through to the context of local government around we can only humanly deliver, what we have within the time and the resources that we have available to us. So how are we managing expectations, especially given this significant lack of capacity, as in physical humans in the positions to do the work? So the question then becomes, how do we not get stressed and overwhelmed? How do we manage our output when there's more to be done that can humanly be possibly done in the day and in the time and the resources available? Again, we have the added element of transparency and bureaucracy within local government, which exists to ensure we make good decisions and serve the public. Unfortunately, the constraints then, I love this quote, unfortunately, those constraints are the efficiency equivalent of wading through treacle. So there's this added pressure that we feel as public servants where, we're not able to move as fast as we would like to. And then on top of it, we're constrained even more so this year with just not enough bodies in the chair to do the work. So, tip, clarify agreed expectations. So it goes hand in hand with the priority. Once we've agreed that it's a priority and we're shifting priorities and energy towards delivering what we agreed to, understanding and getting agreement around what does good look like, what are the expectations of deliverable, by when, with who, how much, and then intensely managing that throughout the whole process until you have the deliverable and the outcome wanted. So this takes conversations. This takes brave, courageous, strategic, professional, respectful, robust conversations all day, every day, which requires a solid state. And I would also argue it requires an empowered belief that when I manage expectations appropriately, I'm better able to serve and support myself, my team, my organisation, and my community. Because why the hell else did we decide to be public servants if it wasn't to be in service of the public? So that's me, Whirlwind. Really looking forward to hearing your thoughts and questions and handing back over to Catherine to have a bit of Q&A.
Hi, Fiona. Back to questions. So for all of those who of you are watching online, you're able to ask questions. I have a little iPad here. I can see your questions coming in and I'll put them to Fiona, who'll be able to respond. I might start with one of my own questions. I found that presentation, Fiona, completely fascinating, actually. Can I turn some of the things you were saying the other way round? For senior leaders, when they're presenting people who report to them with additional priorities and programs that they have to include, and they do get that pushback or that reprioritisation or that no conversation. For people in those more senior roles, how would you advise them to respond to that? They take another program of work to an overworked member of staff who says, really, no, I just don't have capacity to do this. What do you want me to not treat as a priority? What's the right approach for someone in that position?
Is to ask questions. Absolutely. So whether it's the subordinate pushing back, or it's the manager essentially, coming cap in hand, knowing that they're about to add to the workload. Because let's be honest, senior leaders are often privy to and aware of and pressured even more heavily and burdened with organisational information that the layers below them aren't necessarily, that they shield the layers below them from. So what it actually requires is a really open, honest, respectful, strategic dialogue. And, for those of you that are sitting there thinking, oh, crap, I just say yes without having the conversation. And then I end up over committing, and then I under deliver, and then I feel horrible. And then and then the cycle repeats, right? So where you've got the senior executive person, or the senior manager, coming and requesting more, if you're already aware of the workload, or if your team is indicating that they're challenged around workload, it requires a conversation. It's not just do it because I said so. It's being open to acknowledging and going, okay, hey, this has just happened. I know yesterday we spoke about XYZ, and yesterday that was true. But I've literally just come out of a meeting with the CEO or whoever, and they've just handed this to me, which completely changes everything we spoke about yesterday. Can we have a dialogue? Can we have a conversation about the implications of that? And how do we problem solve this? And how do we resource it correctly? And how do I, as the senior manager, leverage your experience and your expertise as the public servant and the officer who knows, who has the expertise, who has the knowledge and all of that stuff? You know your job better than I do as the senior manager. So I want to make sure that I acknowledge and leverage where you're at so that I can then feed the right information back up, and then I can manage expectations appropriately. Where people get frustrated at every level is where they don't feel like their direct line manager, upline manager, is managing expectations appropriately above them, or having their teams back and going into bat for them, and being as transparent as they possibly can be, understanding that as executive leaders, we often can't divulge everything, but there's ways that we can keep our team informed and in the loop without divulging, confidential information, etc. So it really is a skill set at that high level to know what is on the plates of your team. And if they're not naturally good at the prioritization thing, coaching them and teaching them how to do it. Like, that's your job as a senior leader, as a senior manager. If you're in that position, it's you're there because you have those skill sets.
Fiona, thank
and
you.
People are relying on you to do it.
Yeah, Fiona, thank you again. I'm continuing to find this personally really useful. I think we've had another poll put up, which is about, have you learnt some new skills today? And it looks like 100% of people have said yes. We do have quite a few questions that have come through. I'm going to ask my studio team to give me the questions back again, so
Perfect.
I can ask you. But one of the ones that came in, a couple of people have asked if you can put that last slide that you spoke to back up again, and also just run through your top tips again. So I think it was the people will have to tell me if that's the slide they were looking for, but I think it was your final closing slide. I think it was that one they were looking to. So the learning outcomes. Can you just run us through those again quickly?
Yeah. So essentially the tip for the first bit was, if you have limiting beliefs in play, so you've got you're the source of your stress, identify what the limiting belief is, and then have a go at reframing it. So it's literally rewriting it from what I can't do to what I could do, or what I want instead. And there were some examples that I gave throughout the presentation, and this one's an example of how I would take a limiting belief around I'm not allowed to push back, or I can't say no. I would suggest that as a public servant, managing expectations appropriately is about how you serve your public, and you as the local government officer, whatever position you're in, to the best of your ability, what your community wants and needs. And if you don't question and push back, then how will we know that we're making the right or best decision for the use of resources? So first one is reframe your limiting beliefs if you're the cause of your stress. The second one was about prioritization. So get your stuff out of your head and into reality. Your brain cannot associate to a task if it doesn't have a date and a time by which it needs to be completed. There's a whole other thing that I do on a regular basis, which is it's the same as visualization that athletes use. How athletes often talk about visualizing the outcome. You can do that with your workday. And I'm going to give you just a sneak peek into my day. So I actually, because I knew that I needed to hit various amounts of times today, this is how I did my last night. So see how it's got today, Tuesday the 5th of July, 2022. No possibility for my brain to mistake what day it was. And then from 6 a.m. right through, I've literally written out my entire day in schedule. And what that does to my brain is it sets a goal. So, and I don't have to refer to this for the rest of the day, because, and right at 10:23, my brain said, hey, it's time to log on. So like it was already 7 minutes ahead of 10:30. So this is the power of the brain. If you can get all of your priorities and tasks out of your brain and onto something in something physical space, ideally visual, so that you can share it with your team, you can point to it and you can talk about it with your manager, you can shift it around with post-it notes, whatever you got to do, get it out of your head, because that will decrease the stress in your brain. Our brains are not, they're great for imagination, making connections and solving problems. Really bad at keeping lists. Don't use your brain for that. It's demeaning for it. The last tip as well was clarify expectations. So when you are managing priorities and shifting stuff around, make sure you find out what does good look like. So when someone's asking you to do something and you've agreed to it, get clarity of what they expect, the quality, the output, who else is involved, the resources, all of that stuff. Get agreement around that. Because if you don't have agreement, you can't go back and adjust, and you also can't at the end go, hey, we agreed to this, this is what happened instead, we missed the mark or we over delivered, whatever it was. So often we say yes to things, and we don't establish what the expectations are around output. And then that, leads to a whole bunch of other sources of stress.
Fiona, thank you again. There are so many great questions here. Unfortunately, we only have 10 minutes, so I'll try to get through a couple of the key questions here, and I'll also share with Fiona some of the other comments that are coming through. There's a really great question here from Liz Bellwood. She said, what's a good way to manage being the meat in the sandwich when you're middle management? You've got pressure from above with senior management, and you've got pushback from your team. So when you're in the middle, what should you do about that?
Absolutely. So this is where having the conversation becomes really important. I think when we're in middle management, we're pulled in both ways, because, our line manager comes down and tasks us with stuff. And then we task our team, but then we're also having those conversations and pushback from them too. So our ability to have clarity on what the priorities are at any given moment is the best possible way to reduce stress. I think we don't spend enough time or allocate enough priority to planning. So, if you don't have time set aside either on a Monday morning or a Wednesday or whatever time of, and it could be that you have a daily element and then you have a weekly reset. Investing time in knowing what your priorities are means that when you get pressure from either way, you can confidently manage it, because you can say, okay, I get where you're coming from, and this is where I've currently allocated it. And you're asking me to shift, so your manager's asking you to shift. Okay. And then you go to your team and say, hey, we've changed, for these reasons. And your team goes, but I don't agree. And you're like, okay, then we hash it out. And there will be times with your team where the answer is, I don't necessarily agree, and I'm committed to delivering based on what my manager has asked, because he and I had the conversation, or she and I had the conversation, and I'm clear on what the priorities are and why, and I'm letting you know what they are. I get that you guys are also pushing back for your reasons, and we still need to deliver. So how are we going to do it? And then it becomes that negotiation piece, but it requires conversations. And it's sometimes you might have to come back. You might have a nice, really robust, cognitive conflict is good, by the way. It's a sign of a high-performing team where you have really good quality, robust differences of opinion in order to get the best possible outcome and make the best possible decision. So, even developing that as a skill in your team and creating a space where it's safe to have a difference of opinion in order to get the best outcome that's absolutely, the other way that you manage that stress and that pressure, because then you get to share it with your team and you get to engage their brains, not just yours. We employ and we work with incredibly creative, imaginative human beings, and we don't leverage their skills anywhere near enough.
It's so great. I actually wish we had another hour, because there are a lot of good questions here. What I'll do, and I've just been kicked out of my questions, so I'll try to recall one that was a really popular one. This will be the last question. I'll feed in a couple of comments that people made, but we are leading up to the magic 11:50 mark, so I can't see it now in front of me. But my recollection was, I'm so sorry. Can you give me the questions back again? Yeah, there were some. I'll just mention some of the comments that I saw come through. So there were things like, there were people commenting saying that they felt it wasn't the right thing to say no, either because it was disrespectful or not the right thing to do in the workplace. There were a few comments around that. We may, if we get an opportunity later, sort of come back to that. But the last question for today, which has a lot of upticks and votes for it, is how do you begin to break the legacy line of that's how we've always done it? What do you do with that? That's the way we do things around here. We've always done it that way.
It's a fundamental limiting belief. So the fact that we've always done it that way means that there's a whole bunch of lessons that have been learnt over time, some of which are still valid, a bunch of which aren't valid any longer, because the world and the organisation and the people in it and the dynamics and everything have changed. So again, we need to be able to challenge respectfully, intentionally, strategically, challenge the limiting belief that we've always done it that way, because the other implied we've always done it that way and it's the best way. Not true. So, it's how, if we don't challenge, and in the challenging, we may have a whole conversation and a discussion, and at the end of it, there's elements of, oh yes, you're right, that and that is the right way, but this and this could be done differently. In fact, if we did, it would improve efficiency by X%, or it would, decrease whatever, tension, whatever it is, So if we don't challenge the beliefs, we are guaranteed to get the same outcomes we've always gotten, and we don't get to innovate, and we don't get to try new things, and we don't get to make mistakes and learn new things, and we don't get to leverage all of the new stuff, including the new people that are in this incredible sector of ours. And there's a whole new generation of 20-year-olds that we need to attract to the public service desperately. So yeah, we challenge. That's how you do it. You challenge it.
Thank you. We're unfortunately reaching the time where we need to close out the session, and I am sorry for those people that asked questions that we didn't get to them. I hope that the session nonetheless has been worthwhile, and that you picked up maybe an answer to the kinds of things you were thinking about. I think for me, probably the takeout for me personally isn't so much how to learn to say no. It's how to have respectful, open conversations and to negotiate with people. So that for me was incredibly useful. Negotiating up, negotiating down, keeping open to conversations and listening to other people. That seems to be the way to create and shift priorities, and then presumably also the one of the positive outcomes from that is reducing your own stress when there's just too much going on. As I said, I am sorry to those whose questions we didn't get to. Thank you for all of those who responded to that last poll question, which is something we always need to finish off with, where we invite people in the audience to complete our poll. The last question was, tell us whether you learned new information information or a skill related to career or leadership from watching this webinar. I'm very excited to report that 100% of people indicated that they did, which is fantastic. Really, really great. Thank you, Fiona. I'm going to close out now. Fiona Cullen, local government facilitator, thank you so much for being our guest today and for sharing, first of all, your personal and professional journey, and then sharing with us some really insightful information and tips for people on their local government journey. Thank you also to everyone who participated. Today's webcast will be available in full on our YouTube channel and on our social media, so you can revisit it and share it with your colleagues. And if anyone would like to suggest a topic for a future webinar, please get in touch with us. We are hosting these every month, so please get in touch with us, again, also via our social media. I'm Catherine Carter. Please join me again for the next webinar in Local Government Future Leaders series, the first Tuesday of every month. I'll see you again in August. Thank you.